Hi, today I'm talking with Avery Hill, who's got a paper just out in the Journal of Agriculture and Environmental Ethics called Nativeness as a Gradient Towards a More Complete Value Assessment of Species in a Rapidly Changing World. So, hi, Avery. Thanks for coming and being on. I just wanted to first ask the question, what was the problem you were trying to address?
Great. Yeah. So I'm coming from a background in studying vegetation change in California and thinking a lot about how plants are responding to climate change and shifting their distributions. The problem that I saw as I was studying shifting distributions in California, particularly in montane, mountainous ecosystems, was that we don't really have a good framework for applying nativeness, this idea of whether a species is native or not, to species as they are shifting their distributions in response to climate change. This idea of nativeness can carry a lot of weight in some conservation decisions. There's this value that we associate with nativeness, but unclear application of it when we think about shifting distributions.
Yeah. So I'll tell you one of the things that I appreciate about this paper. And then I went into a long-winded question about the inherent subjectivity of defining native range, both geographically and temporally. I was asking Avery about how his work helps clarify that problem.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm so glad you brought it up and picked up on that. I think there's probably been contradictions and inconsistencies with the way that we use native, and those aren't as apparent unless you're thinking in long time scales or during periods of rapid environmental change. And that's simply because when we think about the traditional use of the word native, it's, here's where these species are, and you draw some kind of boundary around it, and you say the species are native to this area, not to this area outside of it. But because the environment has been dynamic over geologic time, and because it's especially dynamic now, there's this mismatch. And so I think that when we reframe it in terms of a species as being native to environmental variables, it cleans up these contradictions and is consistent. So I think when we think about species in the giant sequoia genus. We think about them as in the southern Sierra Nevada of California. There's records of them from northern Nevada and I think maybe even as far as like southern Idaho, but we don't think about those as being part of the native range of sequoia. And the reason is because they can't survive there now, and the environmental variables that the sequoia are native to are not in these locations anymore.
And I'd like to pause here just to explain Avery's concept because we didn't really go into it in great detail. The diagram you see here is imagining that we could use species occurrences and environmental variables, both physical and biological, to model a species in the same way we model habitat suitability. We could then score nativeness as a range between 0 and 1 as we model habitat suitability, and then project onto either past or future environmental spaces to predict what that nativeness score would be. I also asked Avery about this very real problem. The barred owl, as you can see behind me, used to be constrained to the eastern United States, but because of habitat changes, has moved on its own westward and now overlaps with the northern spotted owl habitat. And I rambled, so let's cut to Avery.
When talking about the niche, our minds immediately go to kind of climate and soil type and things like that. And we can find analogous climates all over the world. I think that another really important component of this, and I think it's probably integral to this econative concept, is that, you know, coexisting species are also integral features that describe the habitat that a species is native to. And I think whether or not there might be clear kind of relationships between these species, I think there is some kind of weight and import in that a species niche has been shaped over time by coexisting with these other species. So I think that if we consider co-occurring species as being an important feature and shaper of a species niche in the habitat that a species is native to, then that kind of precludes transcontinental translocations for many species
Mhm.
because a grass in the Eurasian steppe is going to be able to survive in California. But when we think about all of the other co-occurring species and herbivores and pathogens in the Eurasian steppe, and then you think about it in California, like it's not going to have all those other important components. So even if it can survive here, it's almost certainly never going to be actually more eco-native than many of the California grasses and purple needle grass and things like that. So I think that's an important thing is to think about co-occurring species as being part of an important part of the niche, not just climate. I think another thing is thinking about what eco-nativeness allows us to do is to think about nativeness as a spectrum, and the species are more or less native.
So I promised I'd ask you this question. I have this wheel of conservation practice, this whole slew of different kinds of practitioners. So when you look at that, what kind of conservation practitioners do you think you're trying to reach with this?
Great. Yeah, I think definitely people thinking about assisted migration,
Mhm.
either for or against it, I think it's useful to understand how distributions are changing and how this word that we assign a lot of value to, typically nativeness, its role in navigating these decisions. And so specifically wildlife managers and reserve stewards and species specialists might really value from just, being thoughtful about what native has meant and opportunities to think about what native means in a rapidly changing world. And then also other kind of conservation researchers and ethicists thinking about kind of reframing the words that we use and being careful about cleaning up inconsistencies and contradictions so that we can really figure out how to protect and foster as much value as we can in our ecosystems.
Finally, I asked Avery if he wanted to add anything else before we finished our conversation. And this is what came out to me as a highlight.
I don't want people to go around start saying eco-native all the time, not necessarily. It's more just think carefully about what this word means when it's being used and think about some of the contradictions that you've encountered with this word and how potentially adding more nuance to it and reframing it a bit might help clean up these contradictions.
Okay, great. So I've been talking today with Avery Hill from the California Academy of Sciences about his new paper, Nativeness as Gradient Towards a More Complete Value Assessment of Species in a Rapidly Changing World. It's just recently come out in the Journal of Agriculture and Environmental Ethics. Thanks, Avery, for your thoughts. This has been a lot of fun having this chat.